It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 65, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Jeremy Mueller and his wife, Ashli, operate Excelsior Farm just outside of Eugene, Oregon. Together, they raise produce for restaurant sales, retail grocers, and a small CSA to make a modest living on less than 2 acres. Jeremy and Ashli are starting their 4th year at Excelsior with the recent birth of their daughter. Jeremy shares the story of how he got started with Excelsior Farm, which is owned by the owner of Eugene's Excelsior restaurant. We get into how he's worked with the scale that's available to him, using a small tractor to keep up with bed preparation and weed control, in addition to the standard BCS tools that you would expect to find on that 2-acre scale. Jeremy and Ashli have a reputation for achieving excellent weed control, working efficiently, and Jeremy tells us about some of his favorite tools and adaptations for minimizing labor while maximizing production. We also delve into the challenges of getting started in the already crowded local food scene of Eugene, including evolving choices about markets and product configurations that have helped them to grow their business. This was a fun episode to record. I really enjoyed talking to Jeremy, and I hope you enjoyed this episode just as much as I enjoyed making it for you. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. This episode of the Farmer to Farmer podcast is sponsored by Growing for Market magazine, America's most respected source for news and ideas about the business of growing and selling vegetables, fruits, cut flowers, plants, herbs, and other food products. GrowingForMarket.com. Jeremy Mueller, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's exciting to have you on the show. I'd like to start by just having you tell us a little bit about Excelsior Farm, in your own words, kind of how you got there and what the farm is right now.
Starting with a little history of the farm, we have to actually go to when the Excelsior restaurant was bought by Maurizio Papero, who's bought this restaurant over 20 years ago, or something around there 20 years ago. I'm pretty bad with time. And he's been running that restaurant in town, and he ended up getting a home outside of town in Pleasant Hill and really had this vision for starting a farm for his restaurant so he could have this farm-to-table restaurant, and very much in this slow food kind of spirit. He had met Carlo Petrini, and probably goes without saying, but Maurizio Papero is Italian, so he was born and partly raised in Italy. So he just has this whole kind of slow food kind of drive behind what he's doing at the Excelsior restaurant. So it kind of made sense for him to start his own farm. So he bought this house in the country and had a little bit of acreage in the front. And so it was originally his vision, and this would be before I even came around. And so he built a pole barn, and he put up a fence to keep the deer and elk out of this garden area, and even put up a couple smaller hoop houses. So it was a kind of a bold move in like 2008 when there was a bit of a recession, from what I understand. And he was kind of thinking, I want to invest close to home and something real, when the stock market's going up and down, this is something I believe in. This is kind of this slow food, farm to table, close to home kind of investing. So that's really where it started. Then there was a bit of a rough patch because as much as Maurizio loves the farm and this whole slow food thing, he's very much not a farmer. He's a restaurateur, and he's a kind of has an executive position at another winery and all these things. So, obviously he's a very busy person. He's actually not on the farm really barely at all. So he needed someone to manage it and run it. And he had actually a very difficult time the first 5 years making it work. So it just kind of lost money every year. And anyone who really knew how to farm kind of was farming and was like, I don't have time to, he'd say, oh, do you want to farm, help me manage my farm on top of running your farm. And, all the farmers
Right.
were saying, no way, like we're already working 70 hours a week or whatever it is. So it was a long time that he was really trying to make it work, but it was actually, I'd say, relatively like not successful in the first 5 years. And for a number of different reasons, but mostly because he just couldn't quite find the right help. And he found some good help, but it was maybe just people with not quite the right skill set, or people who had a background in with livestock and things, where not necessarily unskilled people, but just not quite a good fit. So I think he started to realize that he needed to have someone run it really as a separate business who could, I guess, run it as a separate business and make the numbers work. And that would require probably doing a CSA, doing market, doing wholesale to other restaurants and natural food stores, and going the whole deal, or kind of going the whole way of having a whole farm business run by someone who is going to put in the time and the sweat equity to get it off the ground. So that's kind of where I entered the picture. And maybe I can backtrack to a little my personal history, but that would be three seasons ago when I came on. We had a kind of a nice agreement to where I could come on as a farm manager. And, with the infrastructure that was there, it was a lot of great infrastructure. But as you know, Chris, like, just because you have a barn, a tractor, and a hoop house and a fence, which is a lot of infrastructure, you don't have a farm still,
Right. It looks like a farm.
It looks exactly. And that's a funny thing when who's building a farm who's not necessarily a farmer, you build something that looks like a farm, but you realize in the end, a farm is a farm has to be someone's whole life,
The farm is the farmer. I mean, that's just
exactly. So it was kind of this hollow shell, that I walked into, and it was a good shell, but I mean, there was no refrigeration and no there was water run to the property, but no irrigation. Well, I should say not a lot of irrigation infrastructure in place, and not really an idea of what they would grow or where they would sell it or anything. So he just kind of, I guess in a sense, he took a chance on me. I think also it could be said I kind of took a chance on him, because I spent the next 3 years working, 6 days a week, building the farm. And so it's been a really good partnership. And we've said from the beginning that we could move from this farm manager position that's as an employee to to us leasing the land and running it completely as a separate business. And the way that's worked has been really good. Actually, this next year, it'll just be a straight lease, and it'll be Ashli's and my business that we're running on his land, growing still for his restaurant, and keeping the Excelsior name, but also selling to other restaurants. And especially, we're doing a lot more for natural food stores. We also have a small CSA program and stuff. So I can get into that in a little bit. But that was the story of the farm.
Then you mentioned that you came into this with some experience. I'm curious why you? What brought you and made you a good bet in this situation?
Right. My background is actually, I did landscaping and tree trimming and just, I guess what I call gardening, but most people, it'd just be like landscape maintenance kind of stuff. So not from really prestigious background or anything, just like manual labor outside working with hand tools and small engines, kind of a thing. So I started doing that in high school, or I guess when I was 14, I started doing that part-time, did that for 5 years, and actually really enjoyed it. And everyone was saying like, oh, I wonder what Jeremy's going to do, like, when he gets a real job or something. But I was just like, I really enjoy working outside and working with tools. So then I spent a couple years traveling and doing different things. And then I spent another 5 years when I moved to Eugene, Oregon, just doing landscaping and tree trimming. So I guess that's kind of what I did. But I always, especially the 5 years I was working in Eugene as a landscaper, I was really wanting to transition into some kind of agricultural job, I guess, or career. And mostly, I guess, after all these years of cutting lawns and putting in irrigation systems and all of these things, I just started to see like I'd really rather be growing food than just working in people's yards. And like I said, I really enjoyed landscaping and stuff, but I felt like that it might be a little more meaningful to be growing organic produce. So I just started slowly, in what ways I could, kind of inching towards that. And what that looked like for me is I started as a side job. I started this little market garden in the Whitaker neighborhood. And it was a really like juvenile attempt, kind of very like, I didn't make any money off it for sure, but it was just my way of like, I've got to do something to try to move towards this. So I got a hold of Elliot Coleman's book, The New Organic Grower, and I made my soil blocks, and we had put up some friends and I had put up a greenhouse. And I think it was only like something like a quarter or a fifth of an acre, lot. And I did a work trade with the owners of the property to use it. So I guess you could say I got my start in urban farming, but I never thought of myself as an urban farmer. I always thought of that as a stepping stone to get out of town, because I always really wanted to live in the country. So anyway, so that was my first step. So that was a good little step, but really what that first step taught me is that I really didn't know a lot about what I was trying to do. I was like, wow, there's a lot more to this than people think, or than I thought. So
well, right. I mean, it's kind of like the tractor and the barn and the greenhouse, where it looks like a farm, but then you find out that there's a whole lot more to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was out there and I was like, wow, this is, I grew a bunch of nice veggies. I had a couple wholesale accounts and like 15 or so CSA members. And I was like, oh, that was really cool, but there's so much more to this and I want to learn. And I'm like, I realized at that point, I could do this the hard way and just like slam it like for the next 5 years and try to learn everything on my own, or I can just go work on a farm, right? For my situation, that was what I was looking. That's what I saw as my options. Like I can kind of try to go my own route, or I can just learn from someone who's really doing this. And
right.
That might be a different route for everyone. I mean, some people can just learn on their own and maybe not work on a production farm or something. But for me, I really needed that.
And I think especially in an area like Eugene, which is such a rich area for market farming, it seems like it would be, you can't do a half-assed job of getting into that market and expect to last for a long time.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's probably worth talking a little bit about the market here too. But anyways, so what I did is I actually looked around and I said, well, I guess what I did is I went to farmers market and I just said, who has like the biggest, nicest stand, right? And then
Yeah.
just got a job working for that farm, mostly just based on the fact that I knew how to work, because I'd done landscaping for years, and that was the largest organic farm in the area, Groundwork Organics. Um, and it was a pretty wild ride. I just spent one season out there, so it's not like I have tons of years, but it's like a little over 100 acres in production, and uh, selling more or less statewide. But I didn't know that at the time I got a job there. I just went to the farmers market in Eugene, and just kind of that's kind of how ignorant I was about a lot of things. So I just went out there, and they really kind of threw me into it, which I really appreciate. So I was able to, drive pretty much every tractor they had, and so cultivate on a G, and disc 20 acres at a time, and set up beds and fertilize with the hydraulic spreader in front of a Colty mulcher from BW Implement, and big stuff. um,
Right.
and and so that was a totally different experience. I went from my quarter acre market garden that was not managed all that well because I was so um, inexperienced, to just being kind of thrown into this really larger scale production. Um, but I guess with my background in landscaping, and which doesn't seem like it would have tons of crossover, but there was just enough, because I had designed and installed irrigation systems and just worked outside. I mean, when I went to work on the farm, I just put on my same muck boots, or whatever, extra tufts, and put on my same straw hat that I'd been using for my other job, and went and worked in the field with guys. And, so there was enough crossover there, and I learned a lot in that season. It was also not, even at the end of one season, I could really tell, like, this is really not the scale that I'm most suited for. And it's probably, so all that to say is, I just working there one season, seasonal job, but they were really nice, and they gave me a lot of opportunity to try a lot of different things. I kind of moved on and found this opportunity out here at Excelsior Farm.
So it was actually a pretty quick transition for you from
Yeah,
being a landscaper to actually ending up with your own, what was really your own operation to run.
it's funny because when I talk to people, I tell them, like, oh, if you want to go from like 0 to 60, like not being a farmer to being a farmer, I'm always telling people, oh, it's probably 5-year, 7-year kind of transition. But it's funny that I say that, and then for me, it was really this kind of whirlwind sort of a thing. Because while I was doing the market garden in the Whitaker, I was still landscaping for my regular job. So it's really that 1 year at Groundwork, and then coming out here. So I guess the next little part in the story would be, Excelsior Farm is a really different scale than either the market garden or the large scale, 100 acres. When I originally came out here, Maurizio, the owner, not being a farmer, he was kind of like, oh, I don't know, it's like 5 or 7 acres or something like that. And I got out here, and it's actually, what it is like a 3.5 acre triangle.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, okay, that's, if you're out looking at farms, you kind of look for square farms generally, not like triangles. But I was like, we can make something work here, and there was a decent amount of like floundering for me in that first year because, I'd worked on this teeny scale with like a BCS and stuff in the little market garden. And then I'd gone to this really large scale. And obviously, taking over the farm here, I didn't really have, I was thinking like, okay, I'll set up my beds. And I was like, okay, do I do like these Elliott Coleman 42 inches on center, or do I do like 72 inches on center, beds? Because I worked with this teeny scale and this huge scale. So now I've been kind of trying to figure out, what will work for me on the farm here. And there's been a decent amount of kind of ping-ponging around with market gardening techniques. And then we've moved into more using like a small tractor. So we're kind of this in-between scale, which is sometimes kind of difficult.
And it seems like your scale is really a function of the land that you had available rather than saying, this is where I want to be from a scale perspective.
And I think that's exactly right, Chris. I run into a lot of people right now who are like, oh, that's so cool. Like, you kind of are like sticking to your acre and a half. I guess we're doing 2 acres now in production, but, you're doing this like acre and a half thing, which I'm all for and I think is really cool. Kind of that's been kind of put forth or publicized by JM and Elliott Coleman. And obviously I have a really pretty deep connection with what they're doing because they've been sources of information for me. And that really is kind of in a sense a scale we're working on. But there's several like really pretty significant differences as well. And those would be, we don't live on the farm because we're moving into just leasing the land. And obviously, so it's always been kind of a commuting job for me. Ashli and I, my wife, and I actually found a little place right up the street. So that's nice that we just live really close. But we don't have a live-on farm internship program, for example. And we don't really have, we've had part-time help, so we have hired people, and currently we have a delivery driver, which is great, that I'm not always doing all the deliveries. But our workforce is like Ashli and I, and since we just had a kid, it's me.
Right.
So the first 2 years I was running the farm, Ashli and I were dating and then engaged, but it was a long distance relationship. I mean, we met here in Oregon, but she went off to finish her master's degree out in New York. So it was just me for the first 2 years. And then the third year we were married and we were working together, which was amazing. We just made a lot more progress because we were doing things together and we really enjoy working together. But now that we had the kid, I mean, we have a daughter that's 5 weeks old. So it's kind of back to just me. So for the majority of running the farm, apart from a couple part-time interns and a little part-time help, it's been a one person farm.
Wow. I mean, when you're structured as a one-person farm, like you said, you're kind of in between on scales. You're not doing the JM40A style, rototiller and an acre and a half of super intense production, but you're also not doing the 100-acre style. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're managing your 2-acre in-betweener scale?
Yeah. So I should make clear we have run it very similar to JM's farm. Actually, for a little while, people were kind of thinking of us as like the sister farm to La Grillinette and stuff, almost because when his book came out, we were using the BCS and the rotary plow, power harrow, and it's a great tool, and it's been a good experience using that. And I've used BCS ever since I did landscaping work, so I was kind of familiar with that. But we have 200, 100-foot long raised beds on the farm or so, and it just became too much for me to maintain it. And I started talking with other market gardeners and realizing like, a lot of them are having 2 to 4 interns that are full-time and 2 full-time employees and the 2, a couple that own it, like running it. So it's a really vast difference between 1 to 2 people being on the farm in the middle of summer and 6 people. And that's not to say one's better than the other. It's just in our situation, we couldn't rely on like cheap or free labor because we were still kind of getting it off the ground, we couldn't rely on a lot of hired labor as well. So what we've done is we've actually kind of moved into a little more mechanization, and we'll probably increasingly move in that direction. So for setting up our beds now, I'm just using a small Kubota tractor, like 38 horse, and I've got the wheels. So because we're not on the scale that we'd have all the mechanical transplanter, and probably maybe eventually if we expand a little bit, but because we don't have mechanical transplanting stuff going, and we do a lot of stuff by hand still, we're sticking with a 30-inch bed tops, 4 feet on center, which is similar to JM's, which is the same as JM's farm. But we're kind of moving towards forming and maintaining semi-permanent raised beds that do get tilled. As far as tillage or minimal tillage, we're probably more to just a kind of more typical organic farm because we do till and reform these beds. I have a bed former that bolts onto the back of the tiller that we use pretty regularly. So we're using the small tractor anyways to make it more possible for us to keep up with bed preparation, so we can lay compost with the tractor, form the beds, maintain the beds, and then cultivate mechanically. So I've been pretty a real stickler for having a really defined, consistent raised bed since we started using the tractor, so that I can use a toolbar cultivator that would, cultivate the paths, bed sides, and the bed tops we can cultivate if we have 1 or 2 rows in a bed. And if we have 3 rows, I take those knives, or I flip them upside down, and then I just do the bed top for 3 rows with a wheel hoe, which is like a goose foot and the tine weeder on the offset wheel hoe. So it's almost like a cultivating tractor, but it's not the push back and forth oscillating hoe. It's just kind of straight ahead with the wheel hoe to cultivate that bed top.
Well, and your weed control, I mean, from what I've seen online and also from what I've heard from other people. In fact, one of the people that asked me to have you on the show was like, their weed control is amazing. They don't have any weeds.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wish that was true. But we do try really hard to keep on top of weeds, and it's not just the cultivation, but it's what I think any good farmer would talk as much about cultivation as they would like preventing weeds. So we do a lot of stale bedding, flame weeding, and pre-emergent flame weeding for any crops that we're able to do that on, so that we don't have to, we don't have time to pick weeds out of salad mix or anything like that. So it's all kind of, on our farm, it's like mostly about strategy of preventing and depleting the weed seeds in that top 2 inches of soil. And then the rest is about, setting up the cultivation so that we can do it as efficiently as possible. Because unfortunately, it's not a possibility or an option for us right now to cultivate everything by hand.
Right.
Yeah. So,
yeah, there's not enough hours in the day if you're running that pretty much on your own.
Yeah, and especially not right now when it's down to just me, and because Ashley's got a full-time job right now, recovering and taking care of the baby. She does a little bit of seed starting, maybe like the last couple of weeks. She's been easing back into it, so.
A little bit of recreational seed starting.
Yeah. Plus, she wanted to get back to something, just to, because she, being cooped up for a while in bed and stuff she's an active person, so she likes to be out and about.
Right. So is there a reason that you haven't gone to a cultivating tractor?
Mostly it's mostly because up until this point, we've just been so small. Like, I say we're doing 2 acres this season, but because it was 1-person farm, the first year it was like 1 acre or maybe a little over 1 acre, and then 1.5, 1 3/4 last year, and 2 this year. So, the first couple of years were just like acre or just over an acre. It kind of made more sense to us to just like hand cultivate some stuff and try to figure out things with the wheel hoe, or I should say to me, because it was just me out there.
Right.
Ashli kind of came along later. But we would like to probably eventually get a G or a Tough built, but it just hasn't been in the budget. There's so many things ahead of that right now. If we can just make it work with the toolbar cultivating setup and some wheel hoe stuff, and maybe a little just touch up with by hand with hose, then that seems to be reasonable right now. I guess that's all. I would love to have a cultivating tractor, but it's kind of just, first we got to get our barrel washer set up and our, some other labor saving things to make it more possible for us to do what we're doing.
So I do want to dig in just a little bit more, Jeremy, on the weed control aspect on your farm, because I mean, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we're really aggressive about doing our weed control, but I mean, clearly there's something you're doing right. I mean, looking at all these pictures, I mean, you kind of poo-pooed it earlier when I said it, but there are no weeds on your farm, Jeremy.
So, yeah, I guess I'd preface this a little bit with, I normally take pictures of the things that look good on our farm. I don't seek out the worst beds, but with that said, we do. The first tool I bought when I came to Excelsior Farm was that flame weeder from the guy that makes them out in West Virginia somewhere. I got kind of forgotten his name, but he has a flameweeders.com, I believe it is, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's a really simple, lightweight tool. But so that was the first tool I bought, and
this is one of these flame weeders that has like is this the four torch model or the 5 torch model with the wheel on it?
Yeah, so this would be the 5 torch model with the wheel on it, which is fitted to a 30-inch bed top. If you roll the wheel down the middle of the bed, it covers the bed top. Also, I found, interestingly enough, if you're on a 1, 2, 3 row bed system, it's 30 inches on top. If you roll it on the outside row, it actually covers over past half the bed and then past half the walkway. So you can actually flame the bed top, side, and path. It's 2 passes per bed, but that way you get the whole surface area. That's anyways, just a little tip. But so from the very beginning, I was really into this like strategy of weeds, and preventing weeds. And it goes all the way back to when I was doing landscaping work. Actually, that's the first place that I learned about and used stale seedbed techniques. Was interestingly enough, was actually wasn't for establishing beds of salad mix. It was for growing lawns, that don't have weeds in them. Right?
Right. Right.
So we would prep a whole area, and we would, turn on the irrigation and water it, and we let it go for a couple of weeks and sprout all these weeds, and then we would go over it with, some kind of shallow cultivation, whether it's we'd use a thatcher, which is really similar to like a power harrow, if you think about it,
Right.
for using on flat ground and stuff. So I was really kind of prepared in ways I didn't even realize. Like I said, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of crossover, but for a small scale farmer, there's a lot of skills. It's a really similar skill set. Actually, running a small business, working with clients face to face, and anyways, in this case, even that's where I learned about stale seed bed preparation. And then I read Elliot Coleman's book and learned, kind of that reinforced it. And so from day one, that was the first tool I bought. And I saw that as, one of the most important tools on my farm, because, I just knew if you can kill these weeds when they're at that thread stage, you've just saved yourself so much work. And so we've just, I guess I've always been experimenting with that. I do most of the field work at the farm. Still, as far as the growing, and I do all the direct sowing, and then we do other things together. Ashli and I do. But so I guess that's just been part of our farm from the very beginning.
Okay.
And I've been experimenting more with tarps, but I actually am leaning for the main season stuff. I'm leaning more towards stale seed bed and flame weeding and shallow cultivation. I guess that's the main methods we're using. The pre-emergent flame weeding, I think, is something that I think Elliot's book has a really good explanation of that, and diagram even, or not diagram, but kind of like visual explanation of that whole process. And
Of that whole idea that the weed seeds are coming up and the carrot seed is still sitting there in the ground,
right.
Basically.
Yeah. I mean, if I was to throw out just like a general timeline, it would be like prep your beds, all your soil amendments are down, and you're gonna like probably irrigate it unless it's rains a little or something, and then you're gonna sprout those weed seeds for let it probably generally like a 2-week interval, and then seed your carrots to into essentially like a weedy bed, which is a little counterintuitive. And then you're gonna wait till just before those carrots pop up out of the ground or emerge, and you're gonna flame weed the bed just before they emerge, and then your carrots emerge in a weed-free bed. So it's just a way of giving them a head start because they're such a slow germinator. But we also do it, like a lot of people, we do it with beets, carrots, beets. I use it for cilantro, a little bit even for dill, and then just pretty much any crop we can try to do that pre-emergent flame weeding. And any crop that's transplanted, if possible, is stale bedded, flame weeded, and then transplanted pretty much like a lot of times I'm bringing transplants out and my flame weeder at the same time, so I can flame a bed and transplant in like, the same couple of hours.
How many times are you then cultivating after that? Typically, is it? I mean, obviously that takes care of the first flush of weeds.
Right.
It doesn't take
Right.
care of the next
Oh
flush of
yeah, there's
weeds.
always more. Always more. Yeah. Um, Generally, I'd say 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
And so
And then
it does become very important that you can do that quickly because, if you're talking 45 minutes a bed, um, to cultivate by hand really well, or just driving down that bed with the tractor, it's a really different, uh, it's a lot faster. So that's made sense for us.
now in the climate there in Eugene, I was out in Corvallis in I think it was late February, mid February,
Mm.
um, and there were. I mean, it seemed like there was some potential for things to be growing outside, but there really wasn't much going on. What kind of a season do you guys have there in Eugene?
Yeah, that's a good question. Our last frost date out here at the farm is gonna be something around mid-April. So we're planting out. We've got about half of our farm planted right now with the our brassicas and our first couple successions of salad mix. But we're not. We haven't planted tomatoes out in the field yet or anything. Um, we're actually tomorrow. I'm planting all of our tomatoes and cucumbers into our covered hoop houses, and then our field ones are going out a little later. So if
Okay.
that gives you an idea, um, and then our frost day, it really there's a lot of little microclimates around Eugene, because there's different elevations outside of town, so that your first frost date could vary quite a bit. But ours is kind of like generally I'm thinking like the end of October, the beginning of November, kind of a thing. Um, and obviously, it
Okay.
varies a lot from year to year, but that'd be your average for where I am.
How long are you guys able to extend your outdoor harvest then in the fall? I mean, obviously tomatoes have a limited lifespan, but kale and stuff, are you able to keep that going into the winter?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's a good climate for that. You have good years and bad years for overwintering brassicas, but generally good years. And it's not something we've specialized in at all because we are so we're so limited on the space we have right now, or that you know we only dedicate a certain amount of the garden to brassicas, and then after that you just have to um, grow more salad mix and things that make sense for someone with a smaller land base. um,
Right.
but all that to say is, through the winter, I mean, you can there's this winter was was actually very mild. um, and last year was the hottest year, as far as I know, the hottest year in recorded weather history. So things have been a little crazy. But yeah, we can go dig up carrots a lot of times in the middle of winter. December, January. Um, out of the field, even. And if sometimes I row cover, double row cover them in the field. And we're kind of moving more towards, if I can get more fridge space built, we would like to dig them earlier and store them in the fridge than have them in the field because it's a little more risky out there. But
Right.
you get the idea. It's a I guess people call it a more of a mild maritime climate. Maybe I'm not sure what that means, but um,
It means that it ain't Wisconsin.
yeah, yeah.
So
And so it's really pretty mild and really good for a lot of these brassica crops. It's almost like the climate made for brassicas, I feel like. And then, like, there's a lot more kale and a lot more brassica greens grown here, a lot than a lot of other places, I guess. Um, with that said, winter before last was like one of the coldest winters on history, and out here at my farm it got down to like 15 below, which is,
Oh, wow.
I've never even heard of that happening ever. I mean, it was pretty crazy. So needless to say, we kind of lost some stuff. So
Yeah, that put a dent in your overwintering brassicas
yeah,
plans.
yeah, you have this, typically it's getting down to maybe the 20s, teens, maybe 15 would be like the lowest low for a winter. But 15 below was whole third, it was totally unheard of. So
Yeah,
things happen, but we have a generally real mild, really nice growing climate.
great. All right. And with that, Jeremy, we're going to stop here, get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, helping plants make sugar from sunshine since 1992. Through 23 years of producing the best potting soils you can buy, Vermont Compost Company founder and owner Carl Hammer has stayed intimately involved in the company, working with a small staff of committed individuals to provide compost-based potting soils chock full of microbial partners and humus-bound nutrients. The people at Vermont Compost Company have a practical understanding of the challenges organic growers face, and they combine that with the comprehensive understanding of soil and plant science and an intuitive comprehension that often has Carl and his crew sticking their noses into a handful of compost and inhaling deeply as though they were sampling a fine brandy. Vermont Compost is the real thing, built on consistency instead of glitz. Like the donkey on their logo, Vermont Compost potting soils aren't glitzy or glamorous. They're steadfast and consistent, stubbornly making certain that your transplants can get everything they need from a few cubic centimeters of soil. Oh, by the way, the donkeys are the real thing, and you get a little bit of donkey manure in every batch of Vermont Compost potting soil. Feed your plants the best. VermontCompost.com. This episode of the Farmer to Farmer podcast is sponsored by Growing for Market magazine. I first ran into Growing for Market in 1993 while working at Wisconsin's Harmony Valley Farm, and I've been a subscriber ever since. At Harmony Valley Farm, I learned that information is the number one coin of our realm, and it provides an almost infinite return on investment. Then, as now, there were a lot of farming magazines out there. There were also a lot of gardening magazines, but other than Growing for Market, there were no other market farming magazines available. And I have to say, I've learned something from every issue over the past 23 years. Growing for Market was founded by a farmer with the idea of fostering the exchange of news and ideas about market farming among market farmers themselves. In fact, Growing for Market was one of the inspirations for the Farmer to Farmer podcast. Available by mail or online, Growing for Market also offers options to access the archive of everything published from 2001 to the present, an invaluable, searchable reference. Subscribe today at growingformarket.com. All right, and we're back with Jeremy Mueller from Excelsior Farm out in, well, not in Eugene, Oregon, but awfully close to Eugene, Oregon. So, Jeremy, one of the things that came up, the person that asked me to get you on the show said you guys are really focused on efficiency. And when I looked through everything online, it's really clear that you've come up with a lot of innovative ways of getting things done on the farm. I mean, at 2 acres, I mean, you mentioned that you're spreading materials out in the field. I mean, that's probably more than you're handling with a garden cart. But if you're doing 30-inch beds, you can't exactly go out and drive through the field with a manure spreader.
Mm-hmm.
How are you handling things like that?
Yeah, so we've had to get pretty creative, partially because we're at this point working with it's a 1 to 2 person farm, and we're kind of an in-between scale, at this 2 acres. So there are things, if we had a little more room and we weren't so constricted in this little triangle, I would say we would probably just find a smaller manure spreader so that it could be a 1-person job to spread the compost. But so I got this idea from a friend to just, if you have a single small tractor that fits your beds, to just use the 3-point hitch and hook up forks to the back, just the simple forks that you can hook up to the 3-point hitch. Some people call it like a carryall or something. And I just built a box that's the width of our loader on the front of the tractor. So, and it has a tailgate on the back. So, on our scale, it's kind of funny, but it's a 2-person job to spread compost, but what we do is I just drop that box next to the compost pile and I scoop out of the pile and fill it up. And then I pick it up with the back of the tractor, and Ashli drives it down the bed, and I just shovel compost out the back. And it's really improved our ability to lay compost because I think we can do 24 beds in, gosh, I think it's 4 hours. In 4 hours, we can compost 24 beds, and that's like the equivalent of, say, three wheelbarrows of compost per bed.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a way on our scale with that limited amount of headroom to turn around with a spreader in tow that we've been able to make it work.
Well, and I would think it would also just be nice from a precision of application standpoint, which I think is difficult to get with a spreader too.
That's true as well. Yeah. So it is pretty even and pretty well put down. Some other things that are creating efficiencies on our farm is just using a drop spreader for all the fertilizer application rather than doing it by hand, which most smaller market gardens would still be doing it by hand. So just this season, actually, we finally got a drop spreader that fits our beds and just drive down the bed, calibrate it right, and that also puts down our fertilizer really evenly, so that's nice.
Yeah.
Our target was to be able to set up one of our crop block sections in one day, which doesn't, if you're coming from a larger scale, it doesn't sound that amazing because we have 24 bed sections. There are 100-foot beds. But going from that market garden scale, but taking a lot of the labor out of it, to be able to form, fertilize, compost, and then after that stale bed, a crop block. For us to be able to set up 24 beds in a day is kind of better than we were doing it when we hadn't been using, say, the compost box, I guess you could call it, and the drop spreader. And so that's created some efficiencies where if we have 8 crop blocks on our farm, within a little over a week, we can set up the whole farm into like raised, composted, fertilized, raised beds ready for being stale bedded and then planted, or seeded and then pre-emergent flame weeded.
Right. Well, and I think that speed is, I mean, it's important no matter where you are, but especially with the changing climate and that chance that you just might have that wet spring when you can't get in, having those ways to get things prepared in a hurry really matters.
Yeah, that's very true. And the faster we can get it all prepared, a lot of times, about half our farm, if we have 5 dry, reasonably sunny days, we can get out there and work the soil. But, in the early spring, sometimes that's really hard to find those 5 days that it dries out enough. And sometimes you have a window of even just 10 hours before, where it's dry enough to work, but not, but the rain's coming, So that we've been in that situation actually pretty much every spring with some of the field work we do.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the infrastructure that you have on the farm to operate those 2 acres. What do you guys have for buildings?
So, we have one big main pole barn that I believe is something like 30 or 40 by 50 feet. And that's really kind of our self-contained, like, multi-purpose building. On the north side of it, we have a lean-to going off of it, and that's our packing shed. And then coming into the barn from the back is where we have access right off the packing shed into the refrigeration. And then I'm currently finishing up a deck that is in a loading dock into our box truck. So you pull it right out of the walk-in. We're still using just hand dollies because of the scale we're on. We're not quite to a full pallet system, even though we are delivering a little over, a couple pallets into town sometimes, but not all to the same person and or account and that sort of a thing. So all that to say, pretty an efficient system there, coming in from the field into the pack out, into the fridge, into the delivery truck, out the middle door of the front of the barn. That's where our box truck backs into, is like this. If you look at pictures, the middle door of our barn is where that box truck goes in. We also I've got, my shop, kind of what tools I do have and I have been able to acquire, I have set up in there. So I've got, a welder and a drill press and a this and a that kind of set up in there. And then all of our hand tools kind of on your way out to the field. So as you can, and then the tractor parks in on the right side. So it's all it's pretty, I actually kind of like having this one building I've spent the last 3 years juggling things around and really seeing where things fit in. But I like it.
Right.
It has refrigeration, the packing shed on the north side, so it's cool all season long and shaded. So that's been a good thing, and that was built by the owner. So that was something that really worked out well, that he put in and probably didn't necessarily know how, or even, how it would be used, but it's turned out to be really good. The other infrastructure we have 2 smaller hoop houses, 20 by 75, and they're not really situated exactly where I would have put them. They were there when I got here, or the length or anything, but we use them, and we've just used the heck out of them, grown tons of stuff in them. And then Ashli and I put up a new 30 by 96 this last winter. This last season was our first year growing tomatoes and those, and we have the V trusses set up so we can do the overhead trellising, kind of lower and lean, and we graft all of our tomatoes going into that house.
Right.
So the tractor we're using is actually Kubota 3901. It's like 38 horse, and we have the ag tires on there, so they're pretty thin, so they work with our small furrows between the beds.
Right.
It was a tractor that I could find that I could set up 4 foot on center, and it could work with our small beds, so that the transplanting we have to do by hand could be a little easier on us. Anyways, so that's a tractor we use, and recently we've been making some purchases. We did find I was gonna build, but an undercutter, or some people call them a bed lifter. But I actually found one from a friend of ours who's a farmer and is moving on. So he sold me this really nice undercutter that fits our beds perfectly for harvesting any kind of, a lot of different crops, like especially carrots and garlic. That's going to be a huge labor saver for us, because we're mostly selling a lot of our crops wholesale. So it's a really different story if you're getting, like, say, $3 per bunch of carrots, or if you're selling bulk or bunched carrots for, say, $1.50 a bunch or $1.25 a pound. All of a sudden, hand digging all those carrots doesn't sound as fun,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've dug a lot of carrots for the last years, but that was one of the top things on our list, is as soon as we can get the tractor that's fitted to our beds and we kind of work out some of that, and we have these raised beds the raised bed can be used as like a guidance system for cultivation. Then it started to be like, okay, how can we harvest these carrots without me, blowing out my knees by the time I'm, however old. So the undercutter has been awesome. Like it's one of my favorite tools.
I know that when we got one on our farm, and I think we were doing maybe 10 acres of the year that we got it, it changed everything for us.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like all of it. I mean, especially with those crops, but we just found so many places to use that. I mean, anything that you're harvesting out of the ground, to be able to loosen it up with the tractor ahead of time was just incredible.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, I mean, we grow a decent amount of garlic for our scale and a decent amount of carrots. So that's the most obvious. But, obviously, also any other parsnips. If you're gonna do a large harvest of onions, um, I just if you do whatever scorzonera or salsify or that kind of stuff, which I don't really do a lot of, but it's just amazing to just drive down a bed and then just pull all the carrots up. Or we've been using it a lot for our leeks. And that's one thing a lot of people are like, I can't make leeks profitable enough to grow. Like it's just too time consuming. And that's what made the difference for us, was just undercutting 3 beds of leeks, or something, which on our scale is kind of a lot of leeks. And just harvesting all of them and cleaning them up decently and putting them in the fridge, and then just cleaning them up till they're perfect before either market or wholesale. That's made leeks work for us, whereas like before we just lost money on them. So it's a tool that is just really simple, so simple, no moving parts, just drags in the dirt, but it's a real game changer for us.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that term game changer, but I would apply it to the undercutter. So farming in Eugene, you got started 3 years ago, but the local food scene in Eugene it's been around forever.
Yeah.
It must have been a real challenge to get started in such a crowded market.
It has been a real challenge, Chris. The local farm scene here is really amazing, and in some ways very inspiring. There's farms here that have been around for 30 years, and they're great farms, and really nice people. And there's other farms that have been around 15 years and others 10 years. And so when we show up at market, we're definitely the new kids on the block, and we definitely have to be able to bring something unique. And that's been difficult, especially at market. We've kind of done market on and off. Speaking of farmers market, we've done it off and on, and it's always been really hard for us setting up next to these amazing farms that have beautiful produce, and they really have the infrastructure that we most of the time have not had, and are kind of doing everything by hand in the first couple of years. So that's been an interesting challenge for us, and I think I'm only just beginning to get a little bit of a handle on the market and where our spot is amongst these just great farms. But to give you an idea about farmers market, like I said, is very competitive in a friendly sort of way. Like these are all of our friends; these are all people we really like. But we're all selling this stuff, and a lot of it's the same, and a lot of people have been buying from Horton Road Organics or Wintergreen Farm for 20 years, and they have great stuff. So we've never done good at market because we don't have any seniority, and we typically would be in not a great spot. And we've done it off and on, but we're kind of leaning more towards not actually doing farmers market and just not going toe to toe, as it were, with these larger farms that I if I was a consumer, I would be happy to support. So, and the CSA market is also very, I'd say saturated, maybe is the word. For example, this last week I went and I set up a little booth at this, what you could think of as essentially like a farm CSA like trade show kind of a thing, where
Right.
I'll set up a booth and we invite the whole community and everyone comes out and you meet. It's called That's My Farmer, and you meet your farmer or you learn about CSA programs. It's also a fundraiser for low-income families to get CSA shares, which is awesome. But I was one of 15 farms there, and I look around and I'm like, these are all great farms, like, and they're all people we know, and they're all doing a really good job. So it's kind of a thing where it's so good for the consumers in the area, and prices are really reasonable, and everyone's putting a lot of work into marketing, but it's hard to be a new farm in the area. So we've actually moved towards doing more wholesale to natural food stores. Um, and that's actually what we do. Like most of our product goes to, um, we have a small CSA program that's about 40 members. So partially our produce is going there. And that's not 40 members because that's where we put the cap on it. That's 40 members because every year we market it as much as we possibly can, and that's how many we get. And we have a lot of returning members, but we haven't. That's just the biggest CSA membership we've ever been able to recruit. So we always do CSA, and we love doing CSA, but it's always been a smaller CSA program. And the rest of what we do is all wholesale to natural food stores and restaurants. And that makes sense with where I'm coming from, because with this being Excelsior Farm and with the owner starting it to grow food for his restaurant, obviously I deliver weekly, and often twice a week to the Excelsior restaurant. So I kind of had this wholesale to restaurant kind of inclination from the beginning, because that's from day one I was planting crops and talking with the chef there, and growing as much as possible for them. So we've just expanded that into growing for about 15 accounts in town now, and we deliver. Starting in June, we deliver twice a week, but just once a week through the, I guess what you might think of as off season. And we typically deliver like 40 something weeks, 48 weeks probably out of the year. So, and during the winter, it's pretty sparse. It's just salad mix and some leeks and storage crops and stuff like that. But but natural food stores has been kind of our jam lately, I guess, because we've met all these managers of the produce sections at about 5 natural food stores in town, and we just really hit it off with them, and we talk with them on a personal basis every week, and we really enjoy working with them because they've been, I think that these produce managers even specifically have been really instrumental in helping build a local food system. So you always think of farmers as the ones out there doing the hard work, trying to make this happen, but these produce managers, they're working long hours and they're doing everything they can, and they're looking at a lot of different fresh lists, availability lists every week, and they're juggling a lot and they're always supporting us as much as they can. So it's kind of been somewhat inspiring working with them, and they've been our best customers. So that's so far that's kind of our niche, I guess. Is natural food stores, restaurants, and CSA. And I
Yeah.
say, really, salad greens. if we had our top 10 crops lined up, I mean, baby leaf salad greens and different salad mixes are like way over and above anything else by a lot. Maybe it's a quarter or maybe a third, probably coming up on a half of our income.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're kind of moving more into doing that. And that's something I've been working really hard on for 3 years to do the stale bedding. And I use, personally, just being who I am and what I prefer, I like this little 6-row seeder thing. So pretty intensive salad crops, and harvesting those. And, we're doing maybe 200 to 300 pounds a week. But it's probably looking more like 300 to 400 pounds a week coming up during the main season of salad mix.
Right.
Or I
And
should say salad mix items, which would include we have about 6 different kind of defined products.
so you do the salad mix now. You're doing that to the grocery stores. Are you doing that bags, or is that going out in clamshells, or are you just selling that bulk?
So we do bulk and bagged. And it
Okay.
would be the same products available as bulk or bagged. And we do almost even, like it's almost right down the middle of bulk and bagged. And we kind of piloted this bagged idea at 2 or 3 places a little bit last season, and it seemed to just show a lot of promise. The managers that, like I said, the produce managers at these places, just really were encouraging of us to do it and to go forward with it. So this season we kind of really put it all together the very best we could, and got another label maker and kind of upped our game a little bit and did the UPC barcodes and things like that, so that it could really be an easy thing to stick on the shelf, at a store. And because even though these natural food stores are so committed to buying local, there's still any of the bagged or clamshelled salad mixes that they're selling are still mostly California grown, whereas maybe the bulk mix is local. So
Right.
it was a little thing that maybe no one else in the area was really pursuing, because it's kind of a pain to to work out all the little details, and it is a lot of extra labor, to I mean, when I do bulk, it goes so much faster and so much easier than going through all the extra trouble to do the bagged thing really well. But
Are you able to get a higher price for the bag stuff, or is that just the price of entering into that marketplace?
so we do get a little bit higher price, and it depends where you're coming from. Our bulk is going. We're only charging like 50 cents more per pound for the bagged. So it's not a huge profit. I mean, it's not a huge difference, for the amount of labor, but in a way, it's kind of our cost of getting into something in the market here. If that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. I mean, I think sometimes that's what it takes, especially in a crowded marketplace. I mean, salad greens are clearly a profitable crop that a lot of people are interested in getting into. If you want to compete in that marketplace, you have to find a way in that somebody else hasn't already done. And I mean, doing things like nice labels and UPC codes, that can make the difference for you.
Yeah, and that's been like I said, if I sell half bulk and half bagged, and I'm only selling the bag for 50 cents more a pound, and I'm selling a case of a dozen bags, 12 count bags or whatever, it's a lot of extra work, but it's a way that we sell, another 100, however many pounds, 100, 150 pounds of salad mix, that is not at a super higher price, but it's at least we sold it, and so we got to work out all of our costs for doing that and make sure we're not coming up short or even or something. But that's been something that we're interested in pursuing and trying to make that process of growing salad mix, harvesting, washing, packing, delivering. We're trying to make that a lot more efficient. So we're always we do a little bit of process mapping. Actually, we do a lot of process mapping in the winter time. We kind of try to go through as many processes on our farm as we can.
When you say process mapping, I feel like that's something I should know what that means, but I don't.
So it's nothing complicated, but just a way of, it's just what it sounds like. Just taking a process on your farm, like for example, wholesale deliveries, and getting a big pad of paper is what we did, and sticky notes, and just go through every step. And every step that you could either make more efficient or any step that you can take out is a big one. If you could take any steps out and it would still accomplish the same goal, or if you can combine steps, it's just kind of a way of stepping back and looking at a process on your farm. And it's something that Ben Hartman talks about in his book, that Lean Farm book.
Yeah.
And I didn't think he got into details about it, but from the first season, it was something I was interested in doing. So for bed prep, I was always, mapping my processes and thinking it through in that way. And especially since his book came out, because we have a friend of ours who has a background in kind of like lean business management stuff. He works for print factories. And so he met with us like every day this winter, and we just, we're just mapping out processes on our farm, trying to make it more efficient. So that really for us, it's kind of a sink or swim kind of a thing. It's, for us, our farm kind of has to be efficient with the amount of labor that we have available. And, we might eventually grow and be able to hire a couple employees, and things might change. And I think they will change. But for now, that's kind of where we're at. It's just like really honing our processes so that when we do get help, we're actually able to use that help well, because there'll already be all these processes in place where it's, which are always evolving, but which are really kind of honed.
Love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea. So speaking of help, you mentioned earlier in the show, you guys just recently acquired a new member of the farm family.
Yeah.
Obviously not going to be helping anytime real soon, but on the horizon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How's that going?
That's it. You know what? It's been a huge blessing that, have a daughter. We have a 5-week-old daughter named Marion, and she's really cute, and we really like her a lot. It's funny because for the first 2 years, I was running the farm on my own, and then last year was when the summer before Ashli and I got married, and really last season was kind of our first year to have us both on the farm full time, and it felt really great. And then the middle of summer, Ashli started having morning sickness, and it was, like I said, the hottest summer ever. So, that was a huge challenge for her. And then through the whole pregnancy, she's been super tough and was worked pretty much. I think she was actually at the farm the day before the birth. It was
hardcore.
Yeah, she's pretty hardcore. But needless to say, this spring has been insane, totally insane. Where we got wholesale orders happening since since March. Just March. So we haven't been doing it a long time, but a month and a half or whatever it's been since pretty much the beginning of April. And I'm trying to build more fridge space because we're out of fridge space, and we've got a lot of projects going on, really trying to get a barrel washer up and running, kind of going back, just farm stuff. We're super busy. And I said, I'm super busy doing farm stuff and she's super busy doing Marion stuff, like just nursing and taking care of her and recovering, because 5 weeks
Yeah.
out, she's, the first month, or I guess traditionally speaking, that first 40-day period has always been looked at as kind of this just period of recovery where you're like almost, not supposed to leave the house kind of a thing. And so it's been back to a one-person farm, and it's been a big blessing to have more wholesale orders and more accounts coming on. But it's also been very challenging, And we did make the decision very recently to just totally not even pursue doing farmers market, because in last year we did farmers market, CSA, and wholesale, and we just had to prioritize, this season and just say, our first year with a newborn kid, there's just some things we're going to have to pull back the reins on, and that was it for us for sure.
One last question before we turn to the lightning round.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you guys at? And when you start talking about pulling back from some things in your third year of business, are you guys a financially viable farm at this point? Are things working for you guys?
That's a great question, Chris. Yeah. So the first year coming on as a farm manager and the owner just kind of handing me the reins, he told me, like, if you can make it work, then it could be your thing. And so from the first year, I paid myself. So I was making up how much I would get paid and how much we would have for farm expenses, the budget, and we the partnership. There was a decent amount of cash flow assistance there, like almost like a CSA sort of a thing, but with a close partnership with the restaurant. Like, we'll help you get your seed and your fertilizer and row cover and stuff, and then at the end of the season, it's got to all add up though. So the first season, I paid myself, not a lot for how many hours I was working, but I paid myself a salary and I paid for all the bills. But we didn't have a margin at the end of the year.
Right.
First year, I don't think that's that bad. Maybe we did somewhere around 40,000, or I guess I did 40,000, and then it's been pretty steady. Just about every year we have added on about $15,000 more in sales. So it's been a slow, steady growth. And it's, things are slow when it's one person, like really slow, kind of painfully slow. Sometimes, as far as like getting infrastructure in place and all that. It's just so different when you have a crew and just like knock out a project. But, we've been conservative, not spending a lot, and moving along that way. So this season we're on track to do about 80,000 sales total, like gross sales, and paying Ashli and me, paying ourselves about half of that, so 40,000. But inevitably, being a young farm that's still getting a lot of these essential infrastructure things in place, we're going to be reinvesting a portion of that 40,000 into equipment, like our barrel washer and whatever it is that we really think, maybe a paper pot transplanter for some of our intensive salad greens and things like that.
Right.
So I would say financially viable, yes. Growing and still in that early stage. Like we're definitely still in that early stage where we're making investments on infrastructure and trying to not get into too much debt and pay ourselves, enough to live on, which we're living pretty simply. So that's we make a living and we're buying equipment, I guess is the easy way to say it.
That's a pretty decent place to be in your third year, fourth year in business.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So yeah,
all right.
it seems reasonable. Not spectacular, but reasonable,
Great. And with that, let's turn to the lightning round. Jeremy, what's your favorite tool on the farm besides the flame weeder?
So I thought of kind of two angles on this. One would be if I just said what's from a totally utilitarian standpoint, like what saves me the most work on this farm, period, it would just be the most simple answer, I think, would just be like the tractor, generally.
Yep.
Just because, we use it for so many different things and so many implements and all that. If though I was to answer it in a more kind of sentimental, personal way, there's this little harvest knife that I kind of inherited it, and it's this really thin carbon steel blade with this little wooden handle. And I've harvested so much with it for just the years that I have been farming. And I kind of have a whole, like when I'm sharpening it, I kind of have a whole little method, and I've harvested tens of thousands of pounds of, produce with it, and it's become kind of fitted to my hand, even like some of where my hand rubs on it, it's just kind of worn in. And I've just never been able to find any other harvest knife that I can even really use, because I really like this one so much. So that'd be maybe more of a, like, we have a joke on the farm, we call it like Excalibur, and it's really funny. But it's like my knife, and if I'm always like paranoid we're going to lose it or something, or eventually it'll break or whatever. Or I'll have sharpened it so many times it'll just disappear, and but it'll wear down. But I guess that's my answer in a more personal way.
Love it. All right. And what's your favorite crop to grow?
So I would say that mix of those salad greens, more or less, of baby leaf and green, headed greens that we harvest and sell, is such a good crop for us. And I really actually do enjoy growing it, because I've focused on it for the last 3 years, really with the weed prevention and the harvesting and packing and all these things. It's become a real central crop that I really enjoy.
Awesome. And if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
So,
I mean, obviously you still kind of are your beginning farmer self,
right.
but
Yeah. So it is a funny question to ask someone who's been farming full time for, I guess, 4 seasons, including my time at groundwork. Um, but I would say this. So I heard this from someone who's older and wiser than me, and I thought, in the last the last year, I found it really helpful. And that is when, you're obviously going to get frustrated farming. It's just going to happen. Nobody gets into farming and has a frustration-free life. So when you get frustrated with something, you really have to stop and realize, instead of just getting bent out of shape, which often I've kind of just gotten bent out of shape about it, and just like, I'm so frustrated about this thing. And you just focusing on that, right? You're just like, why is this way? Like, this just really sucks. Take that and kind of flip it, because your frustration is actually the most accurate indicator of where a process needs to be improved. Right? So when you're getting frustrated with something, it's really actually the best indicator of where to start in improving a process. And so that gives you this proactive way of approaching, whatever the problem is at hand. And that's been a huge helper for us on the farm, is just taking that frustration and actually using it as a tool to improve processes.
I like the way that takes something that we would normally see as being a bad thing, the frustration and the emotion that encapsulates, and turns it into something that's actually good, because it is an emotion that's pointing you to something that you need to do something about.
Yeah, the way I've kind of come to look at it is that frustration is actually you reacting to, you're reacting to something and saying like, this process is terrible, and that's a perfect pointer at like, oh, that's the thing that needs to be improved. And then you switch into that other mode, and you'll notice I didn't say it's my favorite tool on the farm though. So
Right.
yeah.
All right. Jeremy, thank you so much for an awesome interview today. It was really great to have you on the show.
Great to be talking with you, Chris. Thanks.
All right. So wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 65 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and that you can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Mueller. That's Mueller. If you enjoy the podcast, I'll bet you'd enjoy my weekly email newsletter, The Flying Rutabaga. You can check that out at farmertofarmerpodcast.com or purplepitchfork.com. Also, please head on over to iTunes, leave us a review if you enjoy the show, or talk to us in the show notes, or tell your friends on Facebook. We're at Purple Pitchfork on Facebook. Your reviews and your referrals make a huge difference in our ability to reach out to a growing circle of listeners, and that's what it's really all about. One more thing, I appreciate so much all of the guest suggestions that I received through the farmertofarmerpodcast.com website. Please let me know who you would like to hear from, and I'll do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.